It's the Kink Consultant podcast, where we're turning up the heat on all things kink and dating, relationships, and pop culture. So close the door, plug in your headphones, and let's get down to it. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Kink Consultant. I am genuinely so excited to have my two guests here today because they are fellow Spankos, which means we have been speaking the same language since before we knew what that language really was. And I always love to have fellow Spankos on the podcast. Kai and Sarah, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having us. We're definitely very excited to get to talk with you.
As a little bit of background, Kai is infamous in the Spanko scene, but then it took me a while to realize that Sarah is infinitely more popular and famous than Kai. She is everywhere on the internet as a very famous Spanko bottom. And speaking of her bottom, I saw it years before I ever even knew who she was. So it's a small world. The connections are shocking when you really put everything together. And one of the things that probably tied all of us together, well, at least Sarah and me, is we were on a Good Spankins podcast, not together, years apart. But so like I had listened to your episode and everything, I think is the perfect segue to this entire conversation. So I'm going to address an elephant in the room. I think each one of us, and I almost probably speak for every Spanko, we have this fairy tale thing that like, oh, we're going to find someone and we're going to turn them into the Spanko partner we've always desired. Do you both feel that you have succumbed to that sort of like false narrative?
Repeatedly.
I think that's a great way to put it.
I have spoken about this book. There's a very popular book, at least in the Spanko community, called Sex with Shakespeare by Gillian Keenan. And her book basically sold that fairy tale. Not nefariously or anything like that, just that was her story to that point. Sarah, I would love your background of like, when you were on a Good Spankins podcast, you basically were married, but exploring outside of the marriage consensually, correct? Yeah.
Not married, long-term relationship.
Got it.
And not necessarily consensually either. It was very messy. So I've always known it's kind of the typical Spanko story. Always knew it was different. Somehow just intrinsically knew that. Don't know how I knew that. In my teenage years, I really tried to get boyfriends to spank me, and everyone thought it was super weird.
Were they not just excited to like make you happy?
No.
Okay.
Boys wanted to touch my boobs, and
yes, boobs were a big thing
to be touched. A couple of them tried, but it was painfully obvious that they were uncomfortable. It was not fun for me or them or anyone. It's so reluctant. My very early 20s, I met someone 11 years my senior, got married, and well, he seemed really into it with me in his own way. I introduced him to it. He seemed really into it, and then got married. 2 days after we were married, it turned actually violent, and it turned out that he was actually just sadistic, like psychopathic, just a really bad person, and he used it against me. So got out of that marriage quickly. For essentially the next 8 years, I completely suppressed this side of myself because in my early 20s something brain, he convinced me that I had brought this out in him, and I really believed that for a few years. So that leads me to being 30, and finally, over and over again, I kept thinking I could just suppress this side of myself, just will it away, and I could have just a quote-unquote normal life and all the things that so many of us with fetishes desperately yearn for and want. But every time I did that, my needs came back with an even bigger vengeance than they had before. So I started going to Spanking Tube, and I came across a Good Spankins videos. I got in touch with him, and he and I got along really well before we ever even met in person. I decided that I wanted to have one experience, just one experience ever, and then I would be good, and then I could continue on with my life, and I wanted it to be with him. I did not tell my boyfriend. I had a series of rules with a Good Spankin', my pants stayed up, everything. It was really just an over clothes spanking. I had that experience, and it was as world-changing as it is for so many of us. It was not just one time, and that led to eventual dissolving of that relationship I was in.
Was
So,
everything else going well in that relationship? Was it really just that the spanking was missing and you knew there was more there for you?
yes,
Got it.
that could have been a lifelong partnership if I weren't wired sexually the way that I am. So that ended that relationship. And then I really started exploring. And a lot of it at first was with a good spanking. And we made a few videos together. I started dating because a good spanking and I were just friends. We weren't dating,
Yeah.
just spanking, just hanging out. And yeah, so I started dating and I met a really amazing person, heat seeker, and he and I had a bit of a relationship, also put out a lot of videos. But around that same time-ish, I was involved in an accident that essentially kind of like stopped everything in its tracks. Everything in my life stopped in its tracks. And that's the point at which I kind of suppressed all of this again, found a new partner who would end up being my second husband. And he was not a Spanko. And then I spent the next 6-ish years suppressing all of this again.
Suppressing or trying to get him to explore? Which one?
Yep. Excellent. At first, it was trying to get him to explore. Then it was suppressing. And then it was kind of urgently trying to get him to explore again. He is a truly amazing human being. And he really went there with me. He did every single right thing. He said every right word. He put me in the corner. He did all of the touchstone things that I need, that so many of us need. And there was something in the dynamic, something in the energy that was not there, and it always fell flat for me. It did not work for me.
That makes sense, and I can relate. And I'm wondering if we can just explore it for a second. Was that he wasn't getting any fulfillment or enjoyment out of it?
I do think he got some sex fulfillment out of it. I do think he really enjoyed elements of it. I could tell from the energy between us, from the power exchange dynamic, from like all of those things that are so difficult to put your hands on and define, what I get from it. And because of that, because I could tell that power exchange wasn't real in that very identity level way, it just didn't work for me. It often made me feel uncomfortable, which is a really upsetting way to feel when ostensibly you're getting your needs met and your partner is doing everything they could possibly do to fulfill your needs.
It's relatable and it's tough. And I just imagine I wouldn't feel very seen because it's almost worse when they're doing all of the things and it's still not working.
Sure, he didn't feel seen either. The magic wasn't happening. The Spanko chemistry wasn't there. For sure, I would say the DS at times, like that element was there, but that isn't my core need. Like that greater.
The dominance and submission is not what's going to drive you or drive this for you. Okay.
Exactly. It's great and I love it, but that does not fulfill the thing that needs to be fulfilled for me.
Just from a Good Spankins podcast that I listened to, like at that time, you were in the stage of this, okay, they're doing the thing. It doesn't feel perfect, but it's good enough. And this is like, at least I'm getting this. Everything's fine.
Yeah, totally. And, you know, that podcast really was the pivot point, honestly, for my life shifting because I did that podcast. And in that podcast, to your point, like I was happily married. He was spanking me. I talked a lot in that podcast about the fact that it was working, that I found a partner who, even though he wasn't Spanko, even though like we don't have the same sexuality, we managed to bridge it and make it work. As a part of that podcast, I put a call out for women who might want to top me because that felt safer to me and my husband to experience that with a female Spanko. And I was really craving that at that time. And that was the catalyst for everything changing because a really wonderful, kind woman did contact me and spent a weekend at our house and spanked me all weekend. And I was like, shit after that happened because at that point I recognized that everything that I thought was working honestly was kind of like a pale shadow of what it could be. And I remembered what that fulfillment felt like.
Oof, yeah, I feel you on that. I feel that when that fulfillment isn't there, but you can sort of trick yourself a little bit. It's sort of like, oh, if you squint your eyes and sort of look through a glass, it's working.
Yeah. Ironically, I talked all in this podcast for hours about how I was making it work with a non-Spango, and then immediately after that was no longer true, and that led to the gradual falling apart of that marriage.
I mean, I don't want to blame the podcast, but my relationship also fell apart after that podcast. You know, he listens to this one sometimes. I'll have to see if he contacts me about that.
He's amazing.
So we all love him. We absolutely do. There's the reason that like we were on his podcast that obviously had nothing to do with the podcast, but it is very funny that we share that comment. So what were your next steps? Like once you realized, wait, this isn't working, it's something I actually need. Where do you go from there?
Well, I went to FetLife. I started really just looking around again, and my husband and I were very open about everything that was happening. Like, he knew kind of what I was going through. He knew that I really needed this, and so I ended up playing with a guy. Around that same time, Kai and I had started talking, and then we got back in touch after I put out a call for advice on FetLife. The short version of that story is that I literally had bad blistering from the spanking that I got from the guy that I had played with. And I especially wanted to do proper wound care. So I put out a call to other bottoms saying, hey, other people who've dealt with this, can you some feedback? And of course, one guy was on there and was super obnoxious and was like, oh, you really just need to talk to your doctor about this. It was a stupid back and forth. But ultimately, I said, well, I have had a lot of bad experiences with doctors and I really greatly dislike them. So I will not be doing that. And Kai got in touch with me and he was like, well, I'm really sad to hear that you don't like doctors, but here's some advice on how to take care of this problem.
I do think among the different aspects of our story that we do often kind of come back and laugh about this part, but I think it is just a relevant story because I think a lot of Spankos or just people go through this. You know, we got in touch and we chatted for a bit and it was pretty straightforward chatting, and then we lost touch for several months. 3 months maybe?
11 weeks. 11 weeks. I remember that because you made such a big deal about it.
And you know, and before that it had been pretty straightforward, and on this random chance that I saw she posted something and decided to reach back out again, make a joke about it, we connected incredibly deeply from there, which is, I would never encourage people to be obnoxious about continuously messaging people who don't want to message with you. But I think for a variety of reasons, we all pop in and out of touch in the scene. And I'm just glad that like our paths crossed back over again.
So you had spoken a little bit, but it was very surface level.
Yeah.
It was interesting and engaging.
But it was mostly just like, what are the things that you really enjoy? And, you know, we didn't and we go beyond that into real life or, you know, going into the deeper aspects of the identity level stuff.
Yeah.
And
who we are as a person.
Oh, yeah. Because like that is the deeper stuff. And I think that we all have this really common thing. I know the first national party I went to, like everyone asked me, so when did you know you were into this? And I was like, when I was 5, when I was 5. And then I'm like, why are we all asking each other this question? Like, it seems like we all very much have a similar answer, but we still have those baseline conversations before getting into some of like, well, what parts do you like and not like? Because there are nuances. All right, Kinkster, let's talk about pleasure. Not just mine, yours too. If you're enjoying this episode of the Kink Consultant, I need you to do me a little favor, and I promise it'll feel oh so good. Take a second and give this podcast a 5-star rating. Just imagine your finger sliding all over that 5th star, pressing down, giving it exactly the kind of attention it deserves. Yeah, that's it. And you know what happens when you do? I get all hot and bothered knowing you're out there, showing your appreciation. Plus, every time you leave a review, a naughty little brat somewhere gets that spanking they've been begging for. So be a good listener and tap that star, won't you? Thanks, love. Now let's get back to the fun.
I think there's something reassuring too, or I'll speak for myself. I felt so weird for my entire life until I found this community. Like having it reiterated by other people that like, oh no, they also knew at the age of 4 or 5 is comforting in a way. I wonder if that's part of it. It's kind of like just establishing that like, oh, okay, you are in that kind of core group too.
That's a good point. It was my first party, so everyone I met was just meeting me for the first time. Whereas I feel when you two show up to parties, you must be pretty well known by now.
Yeah, I think people who are around FetLife, a lot of them have gotten to know me, whether it's from my photo captions or my writings, and most people who've been on Spanking Tube have seen my wife, but there's still a broad aspect of the community who don't know me well, or who I'm going to mean, I'm not active on Twitter or whatever, X, whatever it is now, or, there are niches of Spankos too, I think.
That's true. Yeah, we're hidden in multiple different pockets of the internet. And for me, it was FetLife. I would see your pictures. And what really shocked me is I was like, I was at the party he was at. How did I not see him, cross paths with him? Yeah.
We've only been to national parties since we've been together. So neither of us went to national parties before we were together. We intentionally mostly have sessions with or play with people who we've gotten to know well, established friendship and trust with. It's rare that if I'm playing publicly in a suite, it's with somebody else doing a fun thing like double strapping, but it's rare that I'm playing with people I haven't established rapport with, so I'm maybe not as public in that way. And there's enough people that we've talked to and established friendships with who want to have scenes or want to meet up, that's the main way that we play. A lot of the parties for us are more meeting people socially and getting to talk with them.
But just to explain what double strapping is, I've seen you double strap, but like a lot of people out there have not experienced it. You and somebody else will top someone.
One on each side, each with a leather strap. Usually with one of a couple close friends of mine, and it's more of a fun thing, but it's really interesting to get into that rhythm with somebody where you kind of build an intensity and then come back down. There's a really fascinating rhythm to it that's really addictive.
Yeah. So it's the rhythm, and it always draws a crowd, I think, of people who are like watching this happen, because it's a little risky when there's two tops instead of just one and they're both topping at the same time.
Yeah.
Going back to this, you and Sarah, you were talking online. How long were you talking before you both met in person?
We chatted a bit. We had our,
11-week break.
Remember so well. And then we chatted for months before we met in person. Maybe 4 or 5 months, close to half a year, I would say, maybe.
That's like a long time, but I guess it's also very common in this thing we do. You don't live in the same place as a lot of people who share your interests. So unless you're booking a flight that weekend, and most of us don't have that luxury, time, money, all of the things, it's kind of how it goes.
Yeah, especially living in Hawaii. That's been a lot of my experience. I often have a lot of time to get to know somebody before we are in a similar geographic location. But I think it is common in general. I mean, I think even for friends of mine who live in cities that have larger spanking scenes, to go back to what you said, there are a lot of interesting nuances to this thing we do. It surprised me both how many things a lot of us share in common, but also how many nuances and differences sort of define the different areas and interests and connections. So I think it's very common to, their closest friends or the people you identify the most with might not be in your area, even if you have Spankos who are in your area.
But even if you identify a lot with them, it still might not be the same. Like your interests might not align. Some people are super into the punishment side of this, and I think you're one of those people. Whereas others are like, I actually hate it. I just want to spank. A lot of my listeners know I am into the punishment and discipline side. Like, I think I just made a video this week that I got some feedback on that was very intense and honest. I explained that it is the discipline side for me. Like, I need both. Spanking can only get me so far. It's the discipline.
The way I often explain it is that I see myself as having two kind of core fetishes. I have a fetish for spanking, and that's kind of been like the lifelong thing ever since I can remember, back to my early memories. Anything relating to spanking has just sent like electrical shocks through my body, and I've just felt this fascination towards it that I don't feel with anything else. And I also would say I have a fetish for discipline, and I do enjoy discipline on its own. If I'm doing long distance discipline with someone, or I enjoy, having people do corner time or writing lines, even if there's no spanking involved, I enjoy the headspace and the dynamic that comes with discipline and accountability, right? Typically, discipline for me is we set goals and standards, and if they're not met, then there's consequences. But by far my happiest place is where those two overlap, right? So by far my happiest place is disciplinary spanking, where there's all the typical things, the scolding, the corner time, time, but there's a disciplinary tone to it where somebody is being punished or disciplined for a specific thing, and the focus is around that.
And then you get the spanking on top of it, bringing your favorite things together.
And the spanking has a different tone to it, for sure.
Especially different from maybe writing lines, which is something you don't even need to be there to witness. You see the end result. I feel cheeky even asking this question, but what do you get out of it? Like telling someone to write lines, because you're not part of that at all. You're not even really witnessing it.
I think it's the headspace and the dynamic that comes with holding someone accountable and helping somebody to achieve things that they want to achieve, or things that will help them in a certain way. Obviously, that can happen directly with, spanking's a direct intervention. In a disciplinary sense, it's this behavior needs to change, and now I'm going to spank you, and we could get really far into the weeds with that, with how behavior changes in that way. But yeah, no, I think it's just that dynamic with somebody, that if a spanking can't be administered right away, to have consequences for what was agreed upon.
You do think that discipline does change behavior?
I think that accountability is one of the most powerful ways we have as humans to change behaviors, and I think that for certain of us, discipline is an expression of that really works for us.
You two finally meet 6 months after starting to talk?
Once we started talking, we talked extensively. We both really enjoy writing, and we both really enjoy thinking through things, and so we talked in a lot of depth about a lot of things. So we really had connected really well.
I just want to explain, as someone who met Kai and ended up on, we messaged on FetLife and then Telegram. When Kai says talked about a lot of things, if Sarah was matching your energy, you must have been writing novels together, because Kai doesn't just write 3 paragraphs. He writes 30 paragraphs, and you might respond with 3 because it's overwhelming. But yeah. I'm imagining Sarah was matching that energy.
Yeah, I mean, the first time that we hung out with you, we were going to hang out for a little bit, and we talked for 3 hours, right?
It was come over and I'll spank you, and that barely happened.
3 hours later, oh yeah, we were going to have a spanking, weren't we? Similarly to Sarah, it was later in my life. I was 30, was the first time I ever truly gave a true spanking to another spanko, where it could really be a spanking. I knew in that moment that this was a pivotal, life-changing moment. I had to have this in my life. I couldn't go back to a life without this. Meeting Sarah was another one of those pivotal moments where it was the nuances align. This is what it can be like to experience this with somebody who's on that wavelength with you. Sarah and I are both discipline fetishists, and the energy just aligned incredibly. Those 3 videos that are the first 3 videos we posted on Spanking Tube are from the first time that we met. That's one snapshot of that kind of weekend. The energy was just such a unique experience to feel like this is the headspace, and everything just lines up in a really special way.
Did it feel different than anything you'd ever experienced before with each other?
Yeah.
I think yes and no. Yeah.
I think in terms of the nuance of the fit was exceptional, because, Spankos, we run the gamut in terms of more discipline oriented or
just really fun, or stress relief. Some people really want it to just kind of be a fun stress relief thing.
So there's something very, very special about playing with any Spanko, especially when you haven't done a lot of that. But when you find that perfect fetish alignment, we were so lucky to have found in each other. It really increases, I would say, the connection and the energy and all of those things.
We've each had amazing experiences with other people too.
Yes.
We had also connected on such a deep level personally in the months leading up to this. So there was that build up there as well, where we just had a really amazing relationship in that way.
Build up can be dangerous too, right? Because you do not know what the in-person chemistry is going to be. So it's almost I hate having pen pals, because I'm am I actually going to enjoy being in person with them as much? So that's the gamble too.
For us, with where we each were, part of what made this such an appealing situation for both of us is we were both married with partners who knew it was quote unquote safe, because we were both married and trying to do this to save our marriages. And so the stakes felt a little bit lower, because if the Spanko energy in person or the chemistry wasn't there, we could still have this personal relationship, but we weren't relying on the other thing so much. We weren't looking for a romantic connection, I guess.
Right.
That's a really good way to put it based on like where you both were. You were both married and trying to explore outside of your marriage to have your needs met. But I'm assuming the goal was to stay within your marriages.
That was the goal.
And it also, because we're sitting here right now, didn't go according to plan. So where did it go from here? Like, how do you go from two married people exploring this kink to not married and now married to each other?
We both had very different situations in it. My ex-husband was incredibly supportive, and like Kai even flew to our house in the center of the United States from Hawaii and spent like the weekend with us. And
in the house with both of you?
Yeah. That's how open it was with my ex-husband.
I had like a hotel, but then I spent most of my time with both of them.
Yeah. So my ex-husband was very supportive of my explorations. And I will say in my case, or the way that I process that is very complicated, because essentially what that means is that he had a front row seat to watching me very slowly fall in love with Kai. It got pretty messy from that perspective. Like the fact that he really knew everything and saw everything, he watched it happen
over time
in slow motion. But that's very different from Kai's situation.
Yeah, which was, similar in intentions, but I was married to someone who just fundamentally found the fetish difficult to work with within a marriage, but in particular fundamentally found my need for spanking to be something that she really couldn't tolerate or work with, and it just had triggered trauma responses in her, and it just ended up being something that didn't work with her. It was kind of a hard stop in that way for us. I was trying to see if exploring this outside of my marriage could allow us to stay married. There was a little bit of playing around with this in a fun way when I first got married to my ex-wife, and then throughout our marriage it just became something she wasn't interested in. And I did finally hit a point, this was years before Sarah and I met, where I realized that my fascination with spanking was far greater than my fascination with other sexual intercourse or other aspects that other people were much more predominant for them. So it came to be in my marriage that I had to introduce this, and we ended up talking about trying to explore this to find a way to make it work, and did a lot of therapy, which helped in a lot of other ways, but it didn't help us work out.
This was one of the core issues, it sounds like.
We had other things we were struggling with, but this was just a hard roadblock. There was no way to navigate around the fact that I had an intrinsic core need that wasn't something that she could interact with or accept or feel comfortable with.
100%. That makes a lot of sense. So you found each other to sort of like have your needs met, and it grew from there.
It did. Almost simultaneously came to similar realizations, just in very different situations. As our divorces were happening, as things were unfolding, we made a really conscientious effort to, we know that we're very connected. We know how good this is. And we also know that there's so much we don't know yet. So we decided intentionally, after we got divorced for basically 6 months, to not necessarily be exclusive and to give each other space to figure out what we needed and what we wanted. During that time, we did spend a great deal of time together. I flew out for a month at a time to spend time in Hawaii. The way that I really processed getting divorced and coming to Kai was, and a lot of people don't understand or believe this nuance, but it is a very important one for me. I didn't leave my marriage for Kai. I left my marriage because of what Kai showed me was possible. I knew that it was totally possible that we might not live well together, or there may be things that just didn't work between us. So when I left my marriage, I was like, okay, I cannot believe that this connection can exist. And the very fact that this connection can exist is why I can't be in a situation that doesn't have that connection. Does that make sense?
That makes total sense. It really hits the nail on the head of you didn't leave your marriage for one specific person at all. It was very much just this is what the right thing feels like.
Yes.
So I owe it to myself to have the right thing.
Exactly.
We talk a lot about opening Pandora's box, or you can't unknow something. To paraphrase Glennon Doyle, who we both read Untamed at a similar time as we were going through this stuff too. Once you know and understand this bigger truth or this new truth that's a more true thing for you, you can't go back to pretending that doesn't exist, right? So once you know and understand that this bigger truth is real, you almost have to act upon it in a way.
I agree with it completely. The thing that's scary and the thing I just want to say out loud is we're dealing with a really small community of people, though. We have no way of knowing how many people actually share this thing that we do in common. But for us, it's not an infinite pool. It's not like there's a Tinder full of people into this. There's not even a FetLife full of people into this, because this is like a subsect.
When I got divorced, I said out loud to myself many times, this can probably sound more depressing than I mean it to, I am making this choice and I might be choosing to be alone for the rest of my life, and I have to be okay with that. That's how deeply I was processing and how strongly I felt about it. But again, for me, because of what Kai and I have showed me, I knew I needed to take that risk. But that's not to say it's not a huge risk. What I would hope is that hope can bloom from this. Kai shouldn't exist, who I fit with on every vanilla level and every fetish level so beautifully and so perfectly. He should not exist. When I got divorced, I also found that very comforting. The fact that somebody does exist that can fit me in this way makes me see that it is possible. For any of us, it's possible. It doesn't mean it's going to happen for any of us. I'm not trying to put on rose-colored glasses, but I took a lot of hope from that.
I think it's important also to acknowledge that this is the truth we came upon, but we have friends who live their lives and make choices in a variety of ways for a variety of reasons, find happiness in a variety of ways. I don't think you could ever say that the only true path is to find somebody else who shares your spanking fetish, right? There are a wide variety of ways to do things in a healthy way and still have access to the things you need. But we feel really compelled to share our stories, especially because going through divorce, even in the situations that we were in, was truly gut-wrenchingly terrible and heartbreaking. And just knowing, especially if people are out there who someday listen to our podcast, anybody who's dating and thinking about this, it's just something to consider. There are a variety of reasonable choices to make and ways to be happy, but choosing to marry someone where there is a core incompatibility, if it comes to the point that doesn't work out, that's a really hard, terrible thing. I wish dating at younger I had more acceptance of this or more understanding of this. I think it is just, I know, and I'm sure I get comments for making this analogy, but I know that it's not exactly the same, but we relate it sometimes to each of us have people we're very close with who are gay or lesbian, and I would never tell my gay friend, give up on that and just find someone who works for you, because that's a really core compatibility. And this, unfortunately or fortunately or however you want to look at it, it touches sexuality, but it goes beyond sexuality, right? It's identity, it's a language that we speak, it's a way we communicate, so it's intimacy, it's connection, it's on so many levels it affects us, and it's just something to know that a difficult thing to have incompatibility in that way.
Sarah, what you said earlier, it's not super depressing. It's sort of like you are choosing you over being incompatible with someone for a long time. You are not the only person in our community who I've heard say that and then also find someone. And it's like a level of acceptance. The relationship you both share and what you found, you're actively right now practicing domestic discipline, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Can you explain exactly what that is?
Yeah.
Yep.
Between the two of us, I would say generally we come up together in a sense with structure, not necessarily even rules, but kind of structure or sometimes rules that, well, I guess for both of us really, but I'll just say from my perspective right now, really help me thrive in my life. And it goes beyond that. It goes into playful things too, or I get very, very sassy. And, I have ways of doing what I call poking the Kai bear, where I can elicit what I want. So it's obviously a lot more fluid than just structure or rules. But I would say the basis of it is structure and rules that when I find myself outside of that structure, we use accountability and discipline to bring me back in. But I would say for us, there's a lot of consistent negotiation around a lot of it.
There's different ways that different people approach this. So for us, it's important that in core ways in our marriage, we are equal. Like, we make major life decisions together. We view each other with so much respect and equality. But Sarah has submitted to this background power exchange where I have the authority within our marriage to spank her or to use methods of discipline if there are reasons for it, which is kind of broad. And then we also do establish certain guidelines or structures to benefit her or both of us. Yeah.
Would you describe your relationship as a 24/7 power exchange?
When people hear 24/7, they think different things, but I think that there is always an undercurrent of power exchange in our life that could be invoked at any time. And that doesn't mean it's visible or expressed 24/7, but there's a certain authority that's been given to me within our marriage that could be invoked at any time. So in that sense, it kind of is 24/7. Like, at any point in time, it is always there under the surface.
I would agree with that. And like Kai was saying, it wouldn't be visible to us necessarily, but I feel it all the time, and I know exactly what I need to do if I want to elicit a certain reaction from Kai. Nobody else might notice, but I notice when he gives me the little sideways glance look that I know is...
It's landed. Whatever you were trying to achieve has worked.
Able to be communicated so subtly.
Yeah. So it's definitely 24/7. I would say it's an intrinsic part of the fabric of our relationship.
Yeah. When we wrote our own wedding vows for each other, we included language related to that in our wedding vows. And
would I have picked up on those and then the vanilla community would not have? Or
oh no, well, these were our wedding vows for each other, and it was very obvious.
But I would say though that like there are some that like yes, you would pick up on that others wouldn't. Like, we have really explicit ones too, but there were more subtle ones too.
Very cool. Okay. I'm really glad you guys addressed it. Like, we didn't leave our partners for these, but we knew each other existed.
Yeah, that's a big thing that I want. Especially, it's hard for me to admit that my mid-20s relationship that I wasn't honest with my partner then. But that's the sort of stuff that so many of us go through, that so many of us feel shame about. And again, I think it's so important to like share the full story so that people don't feel so goddamn alone. So many people feel alone in these things, and it's pretty universal.
I didn't go like fully into my backstory, but I've known all my life that this was a part of me, and until I turned 30, I never at all sought it out. Like, I suppressed it so deeply, and I had such a sense of shame, and just a sense that it was wrong, and a sense that others would never get it or understand it or accept it. I think that's an important part of why we wanted to do podcasts or be present on FetLife or why we make friends or whatever it is. I think it's important not only to share the relationship advice, but just to share the fact that, you know, at a young age, it's okay to accept this about yourself as a normal facet of who you are.
And it's also okay to have missteps and make mistakes along the way.
Yeah.
You know, like have to deal with that and come back, because it's very confusing. The way that I have described it before is I feel like fetish or power play dynamics are almost like a generation behind the broader LGBTQ plus movement.
Yeah.
I feel like LGBTQ has like, I mean, arguably with a lot of things that are happening, who knows, but generally speaking, I feel like that has become more mainstream, more socially acceptable, but that plus, that like the power exchange dynamics, there's still so much cultural shame that's overlaid, and there's so much misunderstanding.
They're pathologized a lot.
There's so much cultural shame. I think even around Kai, like, I don't know if it was like this for you, but the idea that nice guys don't hit women. And then, like, that's your main thing.
It's especially hard with the disciplinary side. You know, like, with fun spankings, you can rationalize a little bit, like, okay, some people think this is a little sexy, but even though at my core I was obsessed with it, the idea of scolding a grown woman and disciplining her, you know, was really contrary to everything I've been taught and grown up seeing.
And as a feminist woman too, it's really complicated from that side. Highly achieving woman who grew up feeling strong and empowered and all those things, and then to be like, no, I not only want but need to give up control sometimes. It's a very strange thing.
It is so strange. It is extremely jarring. And yeah, it all comes with a lot of shame that is sort of perpetuated by society and the messaging we're given from really young ages. And I know a lot of people struggle with that type of thing of like, I shouldn't want this, so I'm going to pretend I don't.
Yeah.
And that's the safer option, or it feels like the safer option. Okay. What advice would you give to someone who is in a relationship right now where they keep fighting and pushing for the kink to exist, and it's just not happening.
That's really hard. I think the things I would tell someone in that situation are just that this is a core intrinsic, and I think this is, I'm specifically speaking to someone with a fetish, fetishes, kinks. I know you go into this on your podcast, but, a kink or like an interest in something or enjoying rougher things, or just that's different, right, in my mind, than having this as a really intrinsic core need. So for people who truly have this as an intrinsic core need, I know people who came to it later in life who I truly believe share the same kind of needs I do and just didn't have the realizations as a kid. It doesn't go away, and honestly, it just gets stronger the more you try to suppress it. And I think it is important to integrity, who you are as a person, to not try to kill off or suppress the core part of who you are. You need a way to engage with those needs, and that could happen outside of a relationship. And we have friends who find ways to make that work outside of a relationship. But if the person you're with is shutting that down, it's damaging to your integrity and your health.
I agree with a lot of that. I think the way that I would frame it is, at the very least, to be completely honest with yourself, because that is the thing that I struggled with repeatedly, was convincing myself that I was satisfied or I was okay, or convincing myself that it didn't matter that I wasn't satisfied and wasn't necessarily fully bringing my full self. And I'll bring in very briefly my ex-husband again, because he said something really profound, that this was the catalyst for me starting the divorce proceeding, actually, which was, if you are not living as your whole self, you're not allowing our relationship to be whole. That's not going to be every partner's response, but that was his response. So I think the point I'm making is, first, you got to be really honest with yourself about who you are, what your needs are. That can be a painful experience that can take a long time to figure out. I'm not saying it's simple, but once you have that, I think then being really honest with your partner. Because, Kai, I think there are multiple ways you can navigate these things with partners, depending on the dynamic, depending on the relationship, depending on a lot of things. I don't think it necessarily leads to separation, but it has to start with that honesty that you have. Kai used the phrase integrity, that you have like full self integrity, or as full as any of us can have at any moment, and you allow your partner to also understand what that self is.
And in the situation you described, there's conflict and pushback, and that's being suppressed. That's something you really have to seriously consider. I mean, to be able to be truthful with yourself and to have integrity with yourself, you have to be able to accept and have expression of this thing that's part of you, in whatever form that takes.
I love that advice. It's so simple, but not something I've heard before. The first step is to be honest with yourself, or find a way to get to that honesty.
Yeah.
It's just sometimes that we find it hard to identify the fact that we are lying to ourselves in the first place.
Oh, yeah. In the podcast with a good spanking, I fully felt and believed that it was working until immediately after, when it fell apart, because I discovered through that podcast that it wasn't working. So it's always going to be a process, but I think being honest about where you are in the moment and continuing to be honest with yourself and your partner is, I think that's the key to any of it working.
I agree with that, and I don't want to get too woo-woo on this, but I think that the actual lie any of us might be telling ourselves is that we don't deserve exactly what we're looking for, and that's why we accept settling.
Yeah.
Because
or
it's about deserving.
Yeah.
Deserving or possible.
Not possible.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that I would love for people to take from our story, is that it is possible, and there are people who accept it and who, can really accept the whole self and reflect that back. It's possible.
Even beyond our relationships, some of our closest friends are the people that have come into our life through this community, who are just amazing people.
That's a great point.
Truly amazing people out there who don't even blink about, accepting this. And
we're not just talking about romantic relationships. As soon as I fully opened myself up to this, some of the closest friends I have ever made have blossomed from Spanko, like being a Spanko and connecting on that level as well as every other level.
Yeah.
I love that. Okay, I think that is a perfect conclusion to part 1 of this, and there has to be a part 2. I talked to a lot of couples, but your story is definitely one of my favorites. Nothing is without difficulty. is what I would say. It's not easy for anyone.
No.
So in part 2, we will be going through a little bit more about how you play in the scene now, because you are both open to play with other people, obviously with some rules and guidelines around it. I know that a lot of us have many questions, and I'm excited to get to ask them to you.
This has been awesome.
Thank you so much for going through your relationship, but I know that we have a lot of listeners who have sent in questions and followers of yours, and I definitely want to get into those as well. All right, so join us next week for part 2 with Kai and Sarah. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with anyone who might find it interesting. And if you have any questions or topics you'd like me to cover in future episodes, feel free to reach out. Email info@thekinkconsultant.com. Until next time, keep on kinking on.